Welcome to the first asynchronous JavaScript sections question. The first question we are going to deal with is what is a callback function, which is a base of all asynchronous processes. There will be two relative questions to this topic. Callback functions nowadays are replaced with promises and async await, but yet it's important to know, and you do face a lot of questions regarding it. So let's begin with an example. Callback functions are used when there is an asynchronous process. So first of all, let's discuss what is an asynchronous process. Let's look at an example. Assume that we have a function fetch data. This has an API call which fetches data from a server. So the process which the fetch data function contains, it is going to take some time. A process which takes some time to execute is an asynchronous process. It means that that process doesn't execute immediately, but it needs some time to finish the job. At the moment, I am not attaching any API call, but at least we can fake the asynchronous process with a function called setTimeout. This will have an arrow function, and let's say whatever process we have inside this setTimeout, that will be executed after 2000 milliseconds, that is after 2 seconds. Assume that the fetch data has some API which is fetching the data, and that is assigned to an object called data. Let me write this here. I'll say data is equal to, let's say, product code and product name. So this is a piece of data which I am just writing as a fixed value, but generally we will have an AJAX call which will be fetching some data from the server, and that will be filled in this data object. Now there is one more function we assume that is for displaying data. So I'll say display data, and what this function does is that the data which is fetched, that we want to display. That's it. Imagine that I'm having here few lines. I'm just writing that this program starts here. Then we call the fetch data. After the data is fetched, we want to display the data. That's what we want to execute. And here after the data is displayed, I just want to say console log that the program ends here. That's it. I'll say start here and ends here. That's it. Now let's try to execute this and see what happens. If you look at the output, it says that starts here, which is actually the first line of the code. Then it goes to fetch data. Now fetch data has setTimeout, which is going to take 2000 milliseconds, and by the time the display data is executed, because it moves, the programming control moves on the next line and display data tries to display data, but by the time this assignment is not executed, so the data which we want to display displays undefined and ends here. Now this process, the fetch data, has asynchronous process, that is a process which is taking some time to execute. We want that unless the fetch data is over, this display data should not be executed. This is where callback function comes in help. Let's try to write a callback function straight away. Now I'm not going to call the display data here. Instead, the function which we have here, this entire function, this I will paste as a parameter of the fetch data. Now the display data function is passed to fetch data as a parameter. Let's say I take a variable here, which is actually not a variable, but it's an object of type function. So this CB, that is callback, will have reference of this function. Not only that, I don't even need to give a name to the function now. So we are writing an anonymous function here. So the fetch data, when the fetch data is executed, it's going to first of all pass this function, and this function is passed to CB. Now unless this job is over, that is setTimeout is over, we will wait, and then we are going to call the CB, that is the callback function. That's it. So now what happens? Fetch data is called, the function, the anonymous function, is passed to CB. Now it will wait, the data will be assigned, and then the callback function will be called. Now let's try to execute this and see how the output is. Now it is waiting for 2 seconds, and then after the data is displayed here, then it says ends here. So now the purpose is solved. This is the purpose of callback function, that because earlier the display data was not waiting for fetch data to finish. So what we did, we just wrote the function as a parameter in fetch data. This is a very practical example. The only thing is, instead of this data assignment, you can have an API call. In fact, we may not have this data here in the same scope. Assume that this fetch data does not belong to you. That is, you are writing just this calling of fetch data, but fetch data is written by some server-side programmer. So this person, the fetch data programmer, should do is he should pass the data here. So the data is locally defined, or I can directly write it here. I'll say let data. So the callback, the data is received by this function. This function will receive the data and that gets displayed. This is a more appropriate way of writing a callback function. So let me just execute this. Now we have the desired output. We started with a practical example, but now let's try to understand the syntax of callback function. The syntax of callback function is that, let's say you have a function name, which you are calling actually. So I'll say function name. Inside that, if you have a function as a parameter, then that is a callback function. The general definition you see of callback function is that a function as a parameter in another function. But that's not the only thing. The purpose of callback is actually justified when you are handling a kind of asynchronous process. Otherwise, just for the sake of writing callback function, it won't be of any use. Let's also one more time easily understand how do we deal with a callback function. Assume that I have a function called custom square, which returns the square, but it takes some time. So again, I am defining this custom square, that is CSQR, as an asynchronous process function, right? So this will actually return, what will it return? It will return the number which is passed to this function, but after a few seconds. So I'll say return n into n, the number into number. Now let's call the function. I'll say let result is equal to CSQR custom square and 2, and then we display the result. Return. Let's run this. So again the same problem is executed. That result will have undefined because it goes on the next line. By the time the value is returned, the next line is executed. Now to resolve this, again we can create a callback function. Let me try that in a simple way. I will say I'm going to call the CSQR. The number you are passing is fine. The second thing is that you are going to pass a callback function. So now this function will be called by the CSQR after some process is done. So now instead of returning this, I can directly say here, first of all, I'll write that there will be a second function. Let me remind you that this is just a parameter. You can name whatever you want to, but I am giving CB because it's a callback function. So now here I can say CB, and inside that I will have n into n. And that is passed to this callback function because this anonymous function is called by CSQR. So CB will pass this n into n here, and we just say result here. Now if I say console log the result, now this should give us the desired output instead of undefined. Now the catch here is that I did not give any value in set timeout. Then also it actually went to a callback stack, and that's why anyway it's going to take some time, whether I give 2000 milliseconds or I do not give anything, right? So once again we run this. Now after 2 seconds we get the output. So you do make sure that whenever you have an asynchronous process, you do deal it in a better way with a callback function. Of course, callback nowadays is not used a lot. There are even better ways, that is promises and async await, but that discussion is for some other day. At the moment, we are focusing to understand callback function. Let's create one more situation. There is actually a term called callback hell or pyramid of doom. Why is it so? That means that callback is difficult to deal with. That's what the term says. All these two terminologies, that is callback hell and pyramid of doom, they say that it's difficult to deal with callback. Why is it so? Let's try to understand that also. Here what happens? Assume that the result which we received, we want to process it further. At the moment we are taking this simple square example, but you can think of any API, third-party API you are calling, and that is returning a value, and the returned value you need to process further. Right now we are just giving this set timeout, and I'll say the result which we retrieved, that further needs to be squared. So the result is passed here and we will get result 1. Again I'll say console log result 1. Let me also place the first console as it is. I'll say result. That's it. Now see this. You just have 2 level of callback functions, and now the code will start looking clumsy. These situations are difficult, especially when you are dealing with error handling and there are many other things. It looks something like this. If you have more processes to deal with, let's say you have 3 level of or maybe more level of callback functions, the picture will look something like this with callback function. Let me run this code first though. The output will be as desired, that after every 2 seconds we are going to get the square of the result. But this way of writing is difficult to handle when you have at least 3 or maybe 4 level or maybe little more, and especially with error handling it becomes really a hell to manage. And to correct these issues, that is to write the callback in a better way, we have promises in JavaScript, but that we are going to discuss in next section. Now for the callback, let's come to the relative questions. The first question is, what is an asynchronous process? So the thing is, let's say you have 4 or 5 lines. Like for example, you have this code, fetch data and display data, where fetch data is taking some time. A process which takes some time is called as an asynchronous process. So the process will return the data after the job is finished. That's what an asynchronous process is. The second question is, what is the meaning of callback hell or pyramid of doom, or rather why it is called callback hell or pyramid of doom? Because the shape is of pyramid like this. That's why, and it is very difficult when you have multiple API calls, that is one call within another, then it becomes really difficult. So that's what a callback hell or pyramid of doom is.